Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at
Yeah.
Robert Desgabets.
Robert Desgabets.
Now, he was a 17th
Yeah,
century
Benedictine monk.
Benedictine monk who was a big fan of Descartes, but also kind of.
Kind of a radical Cartesian in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to start off with, I guess, like, who was this guy?
Well, he was considered one of the greatest metaphysicians of his century by his student Pierre Sylvain Regis.
Wow.
And this is really interesting because his work is often kind of overshadowed by other big names of the 17th century.
Yeah, so let's shed some light on this hidden figure, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, 17th century France, Cartesianism is kind of sweeping through intellectual circles.
Right.
And Desgabets, this Benedictine monk, he finds himself right in the thick of it. He becomes a monk in 1636
Okay.
and quickly makes a name for himself as this brilliant teacher and a real advocate for Cartesian philosophy, particularly in Paris and Toulouse.
Interesting. And was he just like a scholar secluded in a monastery, or was he more actively involved in like this philosophical scene at the time?
Oh no, he was very active. He participated in all the big debates of the day. He engaged with figures like Courtemoy, Malebranche, Arnauld.
Wow. So he was really like right in the middle of it all. What was it about his involvement in these Cartesian circles that makes him stand out?
Well, for one, he wasn't just like a parrot, just repeating Descartes. He was really grappling with the implications of Cartesian thought. He was pushing them to their limits. And sometimes he even found those ideas to be wanting.
Okay.
Take his work on blood transfusions, for example.
Like blood transfusions. That seems like a bit of a jump from philosophical debates.
Well, it's more connected than you might think. So Desgabets was really inspired by William Harvey's discovery of blood circulation,
Right.
which was this major turning point in understanding the human body. It was like the beginning of understanding the body as a machine.
Kind of like a clockwork universe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this mechanical view of the body really resonated with Descartes' idea that the material world operates according to these fixed laws.
Oh.
And so what Desgabets did is he took it a step further, and he actually designed an apparatus and a procedure for blood transfusion.
So he was putting philosophical principles into practice, literally trying to manipulate the machinery of the body.
Yeah.
That's
It was really a pioneer.
That's remarkable, especially for a monk in the 17th century. But this foray into medical experimentation, it wasn't his only brush with controversy, was it?
Sadly, no. His philosophical rigor also got him into some hot water with the church. His views on the Eucharist, specifically on how the body of Christ is present in the consecrated host,
Right.
that sparked a major controversy. He was interrogated by church authorities
Oh, wow.
and forced to retract his views.
It seems like he was willing to follow his philosophical reasoning wherever it led him, even if it meant clashing with the established doctrine.
Absolutely. His commitment to truth was unwavering, and that intellectual courage is really woven throughout his philosophical work. So when we look at the core of his metaphysics, we find a deep commitment to Cartesian mind-body dualism.
So he fully embraced that idea that the mind and body are distinct substances, right?
Precisely.
And that the material world operates according to the laws of physics, like this sort of clockwork universe that we were talking about.
Exactly. And this led him to some radical conclusions, particularly about the nature of animals.
Oh, really?
Right.
What did he think about animals?
Well, he believed that animals were essentially complex machines devoid of a soul in the traditional sense.
Wow, it's a pretty bold statement for a 17th century monk. It kind of reminds me of our modern fascination with artificial intelligence.
Right. It's a really interesting parallel. Both challenge this traditional notion that intelligence requires a soul.
Yeah, and it pushes us to consider that maybe intelligence can exist in forms that don't conform to our usual ideas about it. So we have Desgabets, the devout monk, deeply committed to Cartesian metaphysics, even pushing it to its limits with his views on animals. But this is where things get even more interesting, wouldn't you say?
This is where he takes a turn
Okay.
and diverges from Descartes in a very crucial way.
In what way?
Well, he takes issue with Descartes' view on the source of knowledge.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into that.
Let's do it. So Descartes, he really championed reason, and he had these serious doubts about the reliability of the senses.
Right, the famous, I think, therefore I am.
Exactly.
The mind takes center stage,
Yeah.
and the senses are seen as potentially deceptive.
Yeah.
But Desgabets, a Cartesian, disagreed with this.
He did, and quite strongly, actually. He argued that all knowledge ultimately comes from the senses.
Really?
Yeah, he even modified the classic empiricist motto, the nothing is in the intellect that was not first in the senses,
Right.
to nothing is in the intellect that was not first from the senses.
Okay, so that's a subtle but significant change, isn't it?
Yeah.
It seems like he's acknowledging that while our senses provide the raw material for knowledge, it's the mind that processes and transforms that sensory data into understanding.
Exactly. He believed that even our most abstract concepts like justice or beauty are ultimately rooted in our sensory experiences.
For Desgabets, there's no separation between mind and body when it comes to knowledge.
Right, we're embodied beings, and our understanding of the world is shaped by that embodiment.
That's a really interesting perspective.
Hmm.
But if all our knowledge comes from the senses, doesn't that make us vulnerable to deception?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah, our senses can be tricked.
Of course. And Desgabets had an answer for that. He argued that while individual senses can be mistaken, the overall coherence and consistency of our sensory experience, combined with the power of reason, that allows us to distinguish between true and false perceptions.
Okay, so it's not just about individual senses, but about how they all work together.
Right, it's about the bigger picture.
And he also believed that God wouldn't have created us with senses that were inherently unreliable, right?
Exactly. There's an element of trust in the divine design, a belief that God created us with the capacity to perceive the world accurately.
Okay, so there's this divine element that plays into his thinking as well.
Right. And this connects to another key idea in Desgabets' philosophy, the intentionality principle.
Okay, what's that?
He believed that every thought must have a real object. In other words, our thoughts are always about something. They're directed towards something outside of themselves.
It's like our minds are constantly reaching out, engaging with the world through our senses and forming ideas based on those interactions.
Exactly. He saw this intentionality as even more fundamental than Descartes' cogito.
Wow, okay.
For Desgabets, the very act of thinking implies a connection to something beyond the thinking self.
So this focus on the intentionality of thought, it seems to connect his empiricism with his views on creation and the nature of truth as well.
You got it. There's a definite thread there.
Okay, I'm following you.
So Desgabets, he believed that God is the ultimate source of both the existence and the essence of all things.
So there are no purely possible beings existing in some abstract realm.
Right. Only those that God has chosen to create.
So he's pushing back against this idea of eternal truths existing independently of God.
Exactly. For Desgabets, truth is contingent, meaning it depends on God's will and creative act.
Okay.
However, once God creates the world and establishes its order, truth becomes eternal and immutable.
So it's this delicate balance between divine freedom and the fixed nature of truth.
You got it.
So essentially, our knowledge of the world is ultimately grounded in God's creation.
Exactly.
We can trust our senses because God created both the world and our minds to accurately perceive it.
Precisely. It's this divinely ordained harmony between perception and reality.
I see.
But this view has profound implications for the relationship between faith and reason,
Right. That was a big debate back then.
a topic that Desgabets really wrestled with throughout his work.
It's fascinating how he kind of brings faith and reason together.
Yeah.
He suggests that our belief in God is not just this blind leap of faith,
Right.
but it's grounded in a rationally ordered universe
Yeah.
where we can actually trust our senses to reveal the truth.
It's a very unique perspective, and it really highlights Desgabets' unique position in the world of Cartesian thought.
So would you say he's more of an orthodox Cartesian or a radical one?
Well, he's often categorized as orthodox because he really sticks to those core principles, like the mind-body dualism we talked about.
Right.
But his emphasis on the senses and the contingency of truth, I think that makes him a little bit radical.
Yeah, it's like he's pushing Cartesian thought in these new and unexpected directions.
Exactly.
He's bridging that gap between rationalism and empiricism.
He's not afraid to challenge even the most basic assumptions of his philosophical framework, and that's what makes him so compelling even centuries later.
Absolutely. He embodies that true spirit of philosophical inquiry, always questioning, always seeking a deeper understanding.
Always refining.
Yeah, and his ideas are so relevant even today, especially his views on the intentionality of thought
Oh, yeah.
and the role of embodiment in shaping how we know things.
Definitely. Those are still debated in philosophy of mind and cognitive science today.
And it's like he was already grappling with these questions way back then.
His work really provides us with this rich historical context for understanding these ongoing debates.
It's amazing how these philosophical discussions transcend time.
Right. They're still so relevant.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Robert Desgabets,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways you'd like our listeners to remember?
Well, first, I hope they come away appreciating Desgabets as this really bold and innovative thinker someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo.
Right, he pushed the boundaries.
He pushed those boundaries of Cartesian thought. He wasn't just going to accept what everyone else was saying. He really wanted to find his own understanding.
That true philosophical spirit.
Exactly. And secondly, I hope our listeners are inspired to think about some of the big questions that Desgabets wrestled with.
Like, what are some of those questions?
Things like the nature of knowledge, the relationship between the mind and body, the role of the senses in shaping our understanding, and that interplay between faith and reason.
These are questions that are still so relevant to us today.
They are, and Desgabets gives us this valuable lens through which to explore them.
He reminds us that the history of philosophy isn't just this collection of old ideas, but it's a living dialogue, a conversation that continues across centuries.
A conversation that can really illuminate our own intellectual journeys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, Desgabets encourages us to approach philosophy with the sense of wonder and curiosity.
Be open to new ideas.
Be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Exactly. So to our listeners out there, if you found these ideas interesting, I really encourage you to explore the works of Robert Desgabets.
Yeah, there's a lot to discover.
There's so much depth to his thought, and who knows, you might even find yourself questioning, refining, and expanding upon his ideas.
Keep that conversation going.
Keep that conversation going that Desgabets started centuries ago.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And never stop searching for those aha moments.
The ones that make this journey of philosophical discovery so rewarding.